Chapter 17. The Time Machine. "Where are you?" asked my wife, startling me out of my reverie. We were halfway through a meal at a Japanese restaurant, and for the past couple of minutes I hadn't heard a word that she'd been saying. Or to be more accurate, I had heard the words but hadn't consciously listened to them. "Where are you?" was an appropriate question, because even though I was there physically, mentally I was miles away. I'd been completely carried off by thoughts about a troublesome family matter. We've all had this happen to us. We're in a conversation, nodding and listening, but we're not paying a bit of attention, because we're off in our heads thinking about what we've got to do later, or dwelling on something that happened earlier. Often we can get away with this fake listening, but sometimes, to our great embarrassment, we get caught. When someone asks, "Are you listening?" we may try to bluff it out, saying, "Yes, of course." Or we may sheepishly confess, "No, sorry, I was thinking about something else." The thinking self is constantly generating thoughts. After all, that's its job. But all too often, those thoughts distract us from where we are and what we're doing in the moment. Ever been for a drive in a car and reached your destination with no real memory of the journey? Or thought you knew where you were going but ended up driving to the wrong place? That's because your attention wasn't on the road. It was on the activity of your thinking self. Daydreaming, planning, worrying, problem-solving, remembering, fantasizing, and all the rest. And this is how we habitually go through most of our lives. Take eating, for example. When we're eating food, we rarely, if ever, give it our full attention. We're usually talking to someone, reading, watching television, or even working at our desk. How often have you eaten a meal and focused on it completely, to the exclusion of all else? For most of us, it's a rare occurrence. Have you ever been asked, "What did you do today?" and not been able to remember? Do you ever find yourself snacking on something without even realizing it? Or read an entire page of a book and realize you haven't taken in a single word? We say we were lost in thought, distracted, or preoccupied. All terms that mean our attention is fixed on the products of our mind instead of on what we are doing right here and now. That is, our observing self is distracted by our thinking self. We call this being absent-minded, but our mind is not absent at all. It's our attention that's busy elsewhere. The thinking self is rather like a time machine. It continually pulls us into the future and the past. We spend a huge amount of time worrying about, planning for, or dreaming of the future, and a huge amount of time rehashing the past. This makes perfect sense in terms of evolution. The don't-get-killed device needs to plan ahead and anticipate problems. It also needs to reflect on the past, to learn from it. But even when our mind is thinking about the here and now, it's generally being judgmental and critical, struggling against reality instead of accepting it. And this constant mental activity is an enormous distraction. For a huge part of every day, the thinking self completely diverts our attention from what we're doing. Suppose you're trying to have a conversation with someone, and you're giving most of your attention to thoughts like, "I've got nothing to say. He thinks I'm boring." Or "I've got to get my taxes done." The more attention you give to those thoughts, the less involved you are in the conversation. The same goes for every activity you ever do, whether you're water skiing or making love. The more you're caught up in your thoughts, the less you're engaged in the activity. Of course, some activities require creative or constructive thinking as part of the process. Playing chess, for instance, or doing a crossword puzzle. But even then, thoughts can pull you away from what you're doing. If you're playing chess and carefully thinking through all your options, that's fine. Those thoughts keep you involved in the game. But if you're giving your attention to thoughts like, "I'm going to lose," "She's so good," "She must think I'm a dope," or "I wonder if that new Steven Spielberg movie is out yet," those thoughts will pull you out of the game. Now, obviously there are times when being absorbed in thought is precisely what you should be doing. For example, if you're dreaming up ideas for a new ad campaign, mentally rehearsing a speech, planning an important project, or simply solving a crossword puzzle, or philosophizing about life. But too much of the time, we're so absorbed in our thoughts that we aren't fully engaged in our lives and aren't in touch with the wondrous world around us. And when we're like this, only half present with friends and family, we're not even connected with ourselves. What is connection? Connection is the process of making full contact with your experience in this moment. Connection means being fully aware of your here and now experience and being interested, open, and receptive to that experience. In practicing connection, we pull ourselves out of the past or the future and bring ourselves back to this moment, right here, right now, with openness, receptiveness, and interest. Why do this? For 3 main reasons. 1. This is the only life you've got, so make the most of it. If you're only half present, you're missing out. It's like watching your favorite movie with sunglasses on, listening to your favorite music wearing earplugs, or eating your favorite food while your mouth's still numb from a dentist's needle. To truly appreciate the richness and fullness of life, you have to be here while it's happening. 2. As Leo Tolstoy put it, there is only one time that is important: now. It is the most important time because it is the only time when we have any power. To create a meaningful life, we need to take action, and the power to act exists only in this moment. The past has already happened and the future doesn't exist yet, so we can only ever take action here and now. 3. Taking action doesn't mean just any old action. It must be effective action, action that helps us move in a valued direction. In order to act effectively, we need to be psychologically present. We need to be aware of what is happening, how we are reacting, and how we wish to respond. This means we need to add 3 extra words to the A of ACT. A equal to accept your internal experience and be present. C equal to choose a valued direction. T equal to take action. Connection is about waking up, noticing what's happening, engaging with the world, and appreciating the fullness of every moment of life. You've already experienced this many times in your life. Perhaps while on a walk in the countryside, you feasted your eyes on the fields, the wildlife, the trees and flowers, enjoyed the touch of a balmy summer breeze, and listened to the songbirds. Or during an intimate conversation with the one you love, you hung on their every word, gazed into their eyes, and felt the closeness between you. Or while playing with a child or a beloved pet, you were so involved in the fun of it all, you didn't have a care in the world. As these examples suggest, connection often happens spontaneously in novel, intense, stimulating, or pleasurable situations. Unfortunately, it rarely lasts for long. Sooner or later, the thinking self pipes up, and its comments, judgments, and stories pull us out of the experience. And as for all those familiar, mundane, or unpleasant situations that make up a sizable part of even the most privileged life, connection is pretty well non-existent at those times. Connection and the observing self. Connection happens through the observing self. It involves bringing our full attention to what is happening here and now, without getting distracted or influenced by the thinking self. The observing self is by nature non-judgmental. It can't judge our experience, because judgments are thoughts, and therefore a product of the thinking self. The observing self doesn't get into a struggle with reality. It sees things as they are, without resisting. It's only when we start judging things as bad or wrong or unfair that we resist them. Our thinking self tells us that things shouldn't be as they are, that we shouldn't be as we are, that reality is in the wrong, and we are in the right. It tells us that life would be better somewhere else, or we would be happier if only we were different. Thus, the thinking self is like a pair of dark goggles that dims and obscures our view of the world, disconnecting us from reality through boredom, distraction, or resistance. The observing self, though, is incapable of boredom. It registers everything it observes with openness and interest. It's only the thinking self that gets bored, because boredom is basically a thought process, a story that life would be more interesting and more fulfilling if we were doing something else. The thinking self is easily bored because it thinks it already knows it all. It's been there, done that, seen the show, and bought the t-shirt. Whether we're walking down the street, driving to work, eating a meal, having a chat, or taking a shower, the thinking self takes it all for granted. After all, it's done all this stuff countless times before. So rather than help us connect with our present reality, it carries us off to a different time and place. Thus, when the thinking self is running the show, we spend most of our time only half awake, scarcely aware of the richness in the world around us. The good news is that the observing self is always present and available. Through it, we can connect with the vast length, breadth, and depth of human experience, regardless of whether that experience is new and exciting or familiar and uncomfortable. The fascinating thing is that when, with an attitude of openness and interest, we bring our full attention to an unpleasant experience, the thing we dreaded often seems much less bothersome than before. Likewise, when we truly connect with even the most familiar or mundane experience, we often see it in a new and interesting light. To experience this for yourself, try the following exercise. Connecting with this book. In this exercise, the aim is to take a fresh look at the book in your hands, to see it with new eyes. Therefore, imagine that you're an alien from another planet, and you've never seen an object like this before. Pick up the book and feel the weight of it in your hands. Feel the cover against your palms. Run your finger down a page and notice the texture. Run your finger down the cover and notice that texture too. Bring the open book up to your nose and smell the paper. Slowly turn a page and listen to the sound it makes. Turn several pages, and along with listening to the sound, also notice how the shadows change as the pages move. Grab about 20 pages between your index finger and thumb, and gently flip them all at once. Notice the feeling, the sound, and the movement. Look at the front cover of the book. Notice how the light reflects off the surface. Notice the borders where one color meets another. Notice the shapes of the spaces between the words. Then do the same with the back cover. Pick any page at random and notice the shapes made by the white space. How did you find that alien experience? You've been reading this book for quite a while now, and until now you've probably taken all these different aspects of it for granted. And the same is true for just about every aspect of our life. Over the next few chapters, we're going to focus on several different aspects of connection, particularly how to use it when dealing with painful experiences. For the rest of this chapter, though, we're simply going to focus on waking up, on increasing our awareness of the world around us, and refocusing whenever the thinking self distracts us. A few simple connection exercises. In each exercise that follows, you'll be asked to connect with some experience, such as the sounds in your environment or the feelings in your body. When distractions in the form of thoughts and feelings occur, let those thoughts and feelings come and go, and stay connected. When your attention wanders, and it will, I promise, the moment you realize it, acknowledge it. Silently say to yourself, "Thanks, mind." Then gently bring your attention back to the exercise. There are 4 short exercises, each lasting only 30 seconds, so there's no excuse for not doing them. It'll take 2 minutes to do them all. Connection with the environment. Once you've finished reading this paragraph, put the book down and notice your surroundings. Notice as much as you can about what you can see, hear, touch, taste, and smell. What's the temperature? Is the air moving or still? What sort of light is there, and where is it coming from? Notice at least 5 sounds you can hear, at least 5 objects you can see, and at least 5 things you can feel against your body, such as the shirt touching your shoulders, the air on your face, your feet on the floor, your back against the chair. Put the book down now, and do this for 30 seconds. Notice what happens. Awareness of the body. As you're reading this paragraph, connect with your body. Notice where your legs and arms are and the position of your spine. Inwardly scan your body from head to toe. Notice what you can feel in your head, chest, arms, abdomen, legs. Put the book down, close your eyes, and do this for 30 seconds. Notice what happens. Awareness of the breath. As you're reading this, connect with your breathing. Notice the rise and fall of your rib cage and the air moving in and out of your nostrils. Follow the air in through your nose. Notice how your lungs expand. Feel your abdomen push outward. Follow the air back out as the lungs deflate. Put the book down, close your eyes, and do this for 30 seconds. Notice what happens. Awareness of sounds. In this exercise, just focus on the sounds you can hear. Notice the sounds coming from you, from your breath and your movements, the sounds coming from the room and the sounds coming from outside the room. Put the book down now, close your eyes, and do this for 30 seconds. Notice what happens. So what did you notice? Hopefully 2 things. 1, that you are always in the midst of a sensory feast. You just don't usually realize it. 2, that it's very easy to get distracted by thoughts and feelings. To improve your ability to stay present and notice what is happening around you, practice the following 2 exercises on a daily basis. Notice 5 things. This is a simple exercise to center yourself and connect with your environment. Practice it a few times every day, especially whenever you find yourself getting caught up in your thoughts and feelings. You'll find that it brings you back to the here and now. 1. Pause for a moment. 2. Look around and notice 5 objects you can see. 3. Listen carefully and notice 5 sounds you can hear. 4. Notice 5 things you can physically feel. You can develop this skill further by going for a daily walk and spending the whole time noticing what you can see, hear, smell, and physically feel, and refocusing whenever you realize you've been disconnected. Connecting with your morning routine. Pick an activity that's part of your daily morning routine, such as brushing your teeth, combing your hair, or taking a shower. Totally focus on what you are doing, using all your 5 senses. For example, when you're in the shower, notice the different sounds of the water, as it sprays out of the nozzle, as it hits your body, as it gurgles down the drain. Notice the temperature of the water, and the feel of it in your hair. Notice the sensations of the water running down your back and legs. Notice the smell of the soap and the shampoo, and how they feel against your skin. Notice the visual patterns of the water on the walls or curtain. Notice the clouds of steam billowing upward. Notice the movements of your arms as you scrub or shampoo. When thoughts and feelings arise, acknowledge them, let them be, and refocus on the shower. As soon as you realize that your attention has wandered off, thank your mind and refocus on the shower. For starters, practice connecting with one part of your morning routine each day. Then, as your ability improves, extend it to other parts. In the next 3 chapters, we'll see how connection skills help us deal with painful life experiences. In the meantime, practice seeing the world through new eyes, and whenever you realize that the time machine has carried you off, bring yourself back to the here and now. Chapter 18. The Dirty Dog. When Sula turned 33, her best friend organized a surprise birthday party in a local cafe. At first, Sula was delighted, thrilled that all her closest friends and family had come together in her honor. But as the evening wore on, she began to feel sad and lonely. When she looked around the room, her thinking self started telling her this single and lonely story. Look at all your friends. They're all in long-term relationships, or married and having kids, and you haven't even got a boyfriend. You're 33 now, for heaven's sake. Time's running out. Soon you'll be too old to have kids. Just look at them all, having so much fun. It's easy to have fun when you've got someone to share your life with. They don't know what it's like to go back to an empty apartment night after night, all by yourself. What's the point of celebrating your birthday? All you have to look forward to is being old, lonely, and miserable, or else marrying someone completely unsuitable out of sheer desperation, which isn't any better. On and on it went. Radio doom and gloom, broadcasting at full volume, and the more Sula tuned into it, the more she lost track of the party going on all around her. She hardly tasted the food, hardly heard the conversation. She became increasingly disconnected from the warmth, joy, and love that surrounded her. Of course, it is true that Sula was single and getting older, and that most of her friends were in long-term relationships. But remember the key question: is this story helpful? In this case, it clearly wasn't. And this was by no means an isolated episode. For most of a year now, the single and lonely story had been a major source of misery for Sula, making her increasingly depressed. When her friends talked about their relationships, she was consumed with envy. And when she spent time with couples, she felt like a complete reject. Developing connection skills played a vital part in Sula's recovery. It enabled her to enjoy the good things she had in her life, instead of always focusing on what she lacked. However, I wouldn't want you to think this was some quick fix that changed her life overnight. It was only the start of Sula's journey. We'll revisit her later in the book to see how else she transformed her life. Sadly, scenarios like Sula's are all too common. The more we focus on unpleasant thoughts and feelings, the more we disconnect from the present moment. This particularly tends to happen with depression and anxiety disorders. With anxiety, you tend to get hooked by stories about the future, about things that might go wrong, and how badly you're sure to handle them. With depression, you tend to get hooked by stories from the past, about all the things that actually have gone wrong, and how badly they've affected you. The thinking self then uses that history to convince you that the future is going to be just more of the same. These stories are very compelling, and we're all too ready to give them our full attention. It's no surprise, then, that a common symptom of depression is anhedonia, which is the inability to take pleasure in previously enjoyable activities. After all, it's hard to enjoy what you're doing if you're not connected with it. But the reverse is also true. The more connected you are with a pleasurable activity, the more fulfilling it will be. Thus, connection is an important skill for getting the most out of life. Connection with pleasant experiences. To appreciate connection, practice it with at least one pleasant activity each day. Make sure it's a values-driven activity, not an avoidance-driven activity. That is, it's something you're doing because it's important or meaningful, or a genuinely valued part of your life, and not just an attempt to avoid bad feelings. The activity doesn't have to be anything mind-blowing. It can be something as simple as eating lunch, stroking the cat, walking the dog, listening to the birds, cuddling your kids, drinking a can of Coke, sitting in the sunshine, listening to a favorite piece of music, or chatting with a friend. Now, as you do this activity, imagine that this is the first time you've ever done it. Really pay attention to what you can see, hear, smell, touch, and taste. Savor every moment. And the moment you realize you've disconnected, thank your mind and refocus on what you're doing. Then at the end of the day, reflect on what it was like to be fully present. If it's hard to connect fully with pleasant events, then it's natural that we should so easily disconnect from the unpleasant ones. Whenever we encounter an unpleasant event, we naturally try our best to get rid of it or avoid it. But what if getting rid of it isn't our best option? What if this unpleasant situation is necessary for us to improve our quality of life? For example, in order to maintain good health, you may at some stage need to have an operation, undergo some dental treatment, or practice some uncomfortable muscle-stretching routine. And to keep our finances healthy, most of us have to do a certain amount of bookkeeping and keep up with our tax returns. If we want to live in a clean house, we may need to do a variety of unpleasant chores. And if we want a better job, we may need to attend some highly stressful interviews. So why is connection helpful in these situations? First, it helps us turn off that struggle switch. The more we struggle against unpleasant situations, the more unpleasant thoughts and feelings we generate. Naturally, this only makes the situation worse. And second, when we really pay attention and we put aside the stories of the thinking self, we discover that these events just aren't as bad as we expected. You've probably already experienced this with expansion. When you observe unpleasant feelings with interest and openness, they're nowhere near as bad as they first seemed. Do I detect a note of skepticism? Then let me tell you about washing my dirty dog. Recently, I took my dog for a walk in the park, and he rolled around in the carcass of a dead bird. He loves to do disgusting things like that. Afterward, he stank like a rotting carcass, so I had no choice but to bathe him. I had some very important matters to deal with that night, and I was frustrated that I had to waste my time on this unpleasant task. My mind was making all sorts of judgments. Stupid dog. Why did you have to pick tonight to do something like this? Yuck. That smells disgusting. And I was growing increasingly tense and irritable. But as I filled the tub with warm water, I realized what I was doing, and I made the conscious choice to respond differently. The fact was, no one else was going to wash the dog, and I didn't want to leave him smelling like that. Not that he would have minded. I knew it would take about half an hour to wash him and dry him, so I figured I had a choice. I could spend that time stressed and irritable, disconnected from my experience, pressuring myself to finish as quickly as possible, while thinking about all the things I had to do afterward. Or I could connect with my experience and make the most of it. Either way, it would still take half an hour. How do you make the most of washing a dirty dog? By being present and engaging in what is happening without judging it. So as I inhaled that foul odor, I made room for my feelings of disgust and irritation. I allowed my unhelpful thoughts to come and go, and I focused on connecting through my 5 senses. I noticed the warm water on my hands, and the reactions of my dog as I spoke to him gently. I focused with interest and openness on the feel of his wet hair, the smell of the shampoo, the changing color of the water, the sound of splashing, the movement of my arms, the movement of the dog, the movement of the water. And I'd be lying if I said I enjoyed it. But the experience was much richer than on previous occasions, when I rushed through it completely disconnected. And as a bonus, it was much less stressful for the two of us. However, as always, you should trust your own experience rather than what I say. Practice connecting with unpleasant, boring, or disagreeable tasks, and notice what happens. and make sure that they're tasks you truly value, activities that serve to enhance your life in the long term. Following are some exercises to help you connect with the mundane activities in life. Connection with a useful chore. Pick a chore that you don't like, but that you know is helpful in the long run. It could be ironing clothes, washing dishes, vacuuming, cleaning out the car, cooking a healthy meal, putting the garbage out, bathing the kids, polishing your shoes, tidying the garage, any task that you'd just as soon avoid doing. Then each time you do it, practice connection. Have no expectations, just notice what happens. For example, if you're ironing clothes, notice the color and shape of the clothing. Notice the patterns made by the creases and shadows. Notice how the patterns change as the creases disappear. Notice the hiss of the steam, the creak of the ironing board, the faint whispery sound of the iron moving over the material. Notice the grip of your hand on the iron and the movement of your arm and your shoulder. If boredom or frustration arises, make room for it and refocus on what you're doing. When thoughts arise, let them be and go back to focusing on what you're doing. The moment you realize that your attention has wandered, and it will repeatedly, gently thank your mind, briefly note what distracted you, and bring your attention back to what you're doing. Connection with a task you've been avoiding. Pick a task you've been putting off for a while. Set aside 20 minutes to make a start on it. During that time, focus completely on the experience. Connect with it fully, through the 5 senses, while making room for your feelings and diffusing your thoughts. After 20 minutes, feel free either to stop or to continue. Do this for 20 minutes every day until your task is completed. Build your muscles. Build your life. Practicing connection is like building your muscles. The more you practice, the more strength you have to change your life. Many people fail to make important changes that could significantly enhance their lives, because they're unwilling to accept the discomfort that accompanies change. For example, you may avoid changing to a more meaningful career because you don't want the discomfort of starting from scratch, or you may avoid asking someone on a date because you don't want to risk rejection. The more you learn to connect, diffuse, and expand, the less power you will give such discomfort to act as an obstacle. So aim once a day to connect with both a pleasant, valued action and an uncomfortable one. In the long run, the rewards will be well worth it. Chapter 19. A confusing word. It's time for us to take a little detour. In this chapter, we're going to look at the similarities and differences between ACT and other approaches to human suffering. But first, we need to introduce and define a new word: mindfulness. It's a slightly confusing word because it has nothing to do with having a full mind. Different books will give you different definitions of mindfulness, depending on their content. A spiritual or religious book will define it very differently to a book on sports psychology or effective leadership. So here's my definition. Mindfulness means consciously bringing awareness to your here and now experience, with openness, receptiveness, and interest. This definition tells us several things. Firstly, mindfulness is a conscious process, something we do deliberately. Secondly, it's not a thinking process. It's about awareness. Thirdly, it's about bringing our awareness to the present moment. In other words, paying attention to what's happening here and now. Fourthly, it's about doing this with a particular attitude, one of openness, interest, and receptiveness to our experience, rather than one of struggle, judgment, and avoidance. When we practice mindfulness, we connect with the world directly through our 5 senses, rather than being caught up in our thoughts. We let our judgments, complaints, and criticisms come and go, and instead, we fully engage in the present moment. When we are mindful of our own thoughts, we can see them for what they are and let them go. When we are mindful of our feelings, we can make room for them and let them be. And when we are mindful of our here and now experience, we are deeply connected with it. Thus, diffusion, expansion, and connection are all mindfulness skills. So ACT is clearly a mindfulness-based therapy, and the purpose of this chapter is to point out the significant differences between ACT and other mindfulness-based approaches. ACT is about taking action. ACT is based firmly in the tradition of behavioral psychology, a branch of science that seeks to understand, predict, and influence human behavior. A major concept in ACT is the idea of workability. It's a concept I've been referring to throughout this book, but I haven't given it a name until now. The workability of any given behavior means how well it works in the long run toward creating a rich and meaningful life. In ACT, we learn mindfulness skills to assist us in taking action to improve our life. We do not practice mindfulness in order to enter some mystical state or to get in touch with a higher truth. In any given circumstance, if diffusion, expansion, and connection can help you act effectively, then it makes sense to practice them. Conversely, if they don't help you, then don't use them. The bottom line is always the same. Does this help me create the life I want? ACT is not a religion or a spiritual belief system. Many of the concepts in ACT closely resemble those from many religions, particularly the idea of living life according to your values. But whereas most religions prescribe a ready-made set of values for you, ACT asks you to clarify and connect with your own values. Moreover, ACT does not encourage you to adopt any particular belief system. Thus, my frequent advice throughout this book: don't believe something just because I say so. Trust your own experience. ACT takes the view that if your beliefs work to enrich your life, then that's all that matters. People often see similarities between ACT and Buddhism. Both emphasize the practice of mindfulness. Both encourage living by your values. Both share the assumption that psychological suffering is a universal human phenomenon, created by the natural processes of the normal human mind. And both assume that our common sense attempts to find happiness and avoid pain frequently lead only to more pain. As Stephen Hayes puts it, the large overlap between ACT and Buddhism is remarkable, considering that the former is based on principles of behavior therapy and the second is embedded in a spiritual and religious tradition that spans thousands of years. Given these parallels, it's important to emphasize that ACT is not in any sense a religious or spiritual tradition, nor was it consciously influenced by Buddhism. Unlike Buddhism, it prescribes no formal meditation or prayer practices, has no rituals, chants, prayers, or symbols, has no prescribed set of approved values, and no supernatural or religious beliefs of any sort. ACT is firmly based on the latest cutting-edge research into human behavior, particularly on recent discoveries about the functioning of the human mind. Stephen Hayes and his team were behind much of this groundbreaking research. Over 20 years ago, Hayes proposed our revolutionary new theory of human language and cognition, known as relational frame theory. Since then, a vast amount of research has gone into investigating this theory, and the data coming through increasingly support it. ACT is not meditation. Many of the exercises in ACT have a meditative feel to them, and some bear strong similarities to formal mindfulness meditation practices, especially the ones that involve focusing on the breath. But as psychologist Kelly Wilson says, if you want to learn to meditate, go see a guru. ACT is not about meditation. There's no special way to sit, no secret mantra, no prayer beads, incense sticks, or candles. ACT is about the practical application of mindfulness skills for the express purpose of making important life changes. And that's it. ACT is not a pathway to enlightenment. There are many spiritual or New Age books about reaching enlightenment, all of which place a major emphasis on living in the present moment. ACT stays out of this territory altogether. ACT is about creating a life, not becoming enlightened. Interestingly, many of these books directly feed into the happiness trap by promising the reader such things as a pain-free existence through living fully in the present. While many such books do a fine job of teaching mindfulness concepts, any search for a pain-free existence is doomed to failure. The more we try to avoid the basic reality that all human life involves pain, the more we are likely to struggle with that pain when it arises, thereby creating even more suffering. In contrast to such books, ACT aims to help you create a rich, full, and meaningful life while accepting the pain that inevitably comes with living. One particularly unhelpful idea that commonly occurs in books proposing various paths to enlightenment is the utter falsehood that negativity is unnatural. Evolutionary biology tells us otherwise. The mind has evolved in such a manner that negativity is not only natural, but inevitable. To see it as unnatural just sets you up for a struggle with your own human nature. ACT is not based on just one person's life experience. Many forms of self-help are based on the life experience of one person, who then goes on to write books and give talks about it. The logic goes, this is how I did it, so it should work for you. The problem is that this gives rise to a lot of untried and untested ideas. Just because the author used certain methods to recover from cancer, get over a mental illness, or otherwise transform her life, doesn't mean those methods are going to work for the next person. In contrast, ACT is based on an international program of scientific research that has repeatedly shown the efficacy of its methods. So, ACT is not a religious, mystical, or spiritual path, although it may have some parallels. ACT is about creating a meaningful life through accepting our internal experience, staying present, and taking action while being guided by our values. And workability is always the deciding factor. So if there's anything in this book, or any other self-help book, that works toward creating the life you want, then please make use of it. But don't believe anything in this or any other book simply because you read it. Your own experience trumps someone else's advice. And that completes this little detour. We're back on the road, and it's time to continue our journey. In the next chapter, we'll take a closer look at connection and the many surprising ways it can help you overcome life's obstacles.